Hello, this is Professor Kitch, and this is part 2 of using Excel. In this lesson, you're going to learn to use built-in Excel functions in formulas. The specific functions we're going to use in this particular lesson are the min function, the max function, and the average function. So this webcast is an extension of part 1 we did just a few minutes ago, where we calculated the velocities in both meters per second and feet per second, given the distance measurement of 5,000 meters for once around the course and all these time values for each of the 20 trials. Now what we want to do is we want to compute the min and the max and the average velocity for all of these 20 trials, both in meters per second and in feet per second. Now we could do these calculations by hand, but we're going to take advantage of some of the functions that are built into Excel to make it easier for us. And the functions in Excel, there are many of them. And if you come up here and click this f of x, you'll get a screen that pops up like this, a menu that has all kinds of functions. If you look in here, there's just a huge number of functions. And someday you're going to use a bunch of these. But for right now, we're going to stick to a few simple ones. So I'm going to cancel this. And there's a nice feature in Excel is you don't have to actually remember the function names exactly when you do this. You just have to start typing. So we know we want the minimum values of the velocities above. So we're going to just start typing min. And look, right there pops up this function called min. And it tells you right out here a little bit about what the function does. And it says it returns the smallest number in a set of values. Well, that language might sound a little funny about returning the smallest value, but it just figures out what the smallest number is. And then functions always after the name have a parenthesis that tells you what goes into the function. And as soon as you hit the parenthesis, Excel gives you some help here about what goes in. So it's telling you that the next thing that goes in here is a number and then a comma and then a number 2. So for instance, if I just started typing some numbers like 9 minus 2, comma 4, comma 5, comma 22, comma minus 109. Notice each time I type one of those in, it's telling me, hey, you can enter another number here. And when I'm done, if I just hit another parentheses to close it, then I finish my function. And if I hit return on this, this function is going to give back the value of 109. Well, what does that really mean? Well, what a function does is it takes these things between the parentheses. They're called arguments, but don't worry about the name of them. They're just things that go into the function, and it gives you back something else. In this case, it takes all these numbers that you put in there, and it gives you back the one that's the smallest. So in this case, it's 109. Well, that's interesting, but not very interesting. What we really want to do is know what's the minimum of all the values in this column right here. So we're going to use the same function. I'll just type it again, min. And then instead of entering numbers, I'm going to click and drag my box down here over the whole column. And notice when I do that, it starts entering this little figure inside the parentheses there, D12 colon D31. If I go ahead and close the parentheses and hit return, you'll notice that it's given me the minimum value here of all the velocities, and it's this one where it took us 200 seconds to go around and it's 25 meters per second. Now this symbol D12 through D31 is just a way to write a list of numbers. If I wanted to, I could type that in myself. I could just say this is going to be equal to min of D12. When I say colon, it means that's the first cell I put in as a starting point of the list I'm giving, and D31, and the second is the ending list. And then, you know, if I do it that way, I get the same box that we had before of all the numbers, and that's the value right there. Well, now I've computed the min value here, and it's equal to 25. We now want to compute the max of the column of velocities and the average of the column of velocities, and we're just going to use the same concept here using functions. And if I want to use the max, I'm just going to type equals and start typing a name, max, and sure enough, right away pops up a max there. And I hit left parent. I again highlight my box of numbers that I want to find the max out of, close the parent, hit return, and sure enough it says it's 41.28. And if I search carefully through this list, I will indeed find that 41.28 is the max. And then finally I need the average, so that one I'm just going to start typing in AVE. Now be careful here, you might see AVE might be short for average, but notice in Excel that it actually spells it all the way out. If you want to, when you get this list, you can double click on that instead of typing it out, and it'll pop that in there for you. And then again, I'm just going to highlight the column that I'm interested in the average in, hit parentheses, and there I go. Now I have the average of those columns. Now I'd like to do the same computations for the velocity in feet per second from this column. But there's a really easy way to do that. I already did those formulas over here, so all I have to do is take these formulas. I'm going to drag this green box at the bottom to do a copy function, drag it over to the right, and magic, this equation now is for the second column. Now I want to make sure that's right. Remember, we had this issue of, is something an absolute reference or a relative reference? So I'm going to double click on this just to make sure. Oh, and sure enough, notice that the min is for the correct box of values. Hit escape, double click on this one. The max is also for the correct block of values, and the average is for the correct block of values. So excellent. So now I've used that really simple copy command, and I've completed all three of those other functions in a very quick and easy fashion. Well, that's a quick introduction to a few functions. There's a lot more functions in Excel. If you click this f of x box and you get your function menu up here, you'll find there's just a huge number of functions here. You can do an absolute value. You'll find that there's actually transcendental functions like sine and cosine. There's categories of functions, and so you can come in here and find functions that are related to statistical functions. So there's your average, there's beta distributions and stuff like that that you may or may not know about. You can count, you can find, like there's our min, there's a median if you want to find the median. There's just a huge number of functions out here, and if you're interested you could play with some of those. There'll be some there that you recognize, but that's the basic exercise in using functions in Excel to make your life easier. Hope you enjoyed this. Have fun.